March 15th, 2025, 2:22 p.m. Saturday. Just got back from a walk around the block. It wasn't on a clock. Didn't hear tick-tock. I let myself go, down with the flow. I didn't know when the world would blow. I said, this isn't real, where I have to kneel to anyone who would steal my right to feel. I'm going to read an excerpt from Return from Tomorrow. It's by George G. Ritchie with Elizabeth Sherrill. At the age of 20, George Ritchie died in an army hospital. 9 minutes later, he returned to life. I had died and I was looking for myself. This is page 42, paragraph 2. I'll start. At last, at the end of several hallways, I came to a large room that looked familiar. There was a sleeping form in each of the beds that lined the walls. But the one that I was looking for, the one that I was now convinced belonged to me, was in one of the small single rooms near the door that I was sure of. I looked eagerly in all of these, but the first two were empty, and the last one was a man in traction, both legs encased in plaster cases. I returned to the corridor and looked up and down, undecided. Where was that little room? What wing of the huge hospital was it in even? I racked my brain trying to remember something, anything that would help me locate it, but it was no use. I would have been unconscious when they brought me there from the X-ray room. When I woke up, I had been so obsessed with the idea of getting to Virginia that I had rushed off without even a backward glance. The fact was that somewhere in over 200 barracks, there was one tiny room which was infinitely important to me, and it could be in any one of them at all. And so to begin one of the strangest searches that can ever have taken place, the search for myself. From one ward to the other of that enormous complex, I rushed, pausing in each small room, stooping over the occupant of the bed, hurrying on. There were hundreds and hundreds of these narrow single-bed cubicles, each so like every other one, and the wards all so alike, that I soon became confused about which ones I had been to and whether I was simply retracing my steps over and over. And slowly, a far more alarming truth began to register. I have never seen myself. Not really. Not the way I saw other people. From my chest down, I had seen myself. In the round, of course. But from the shoulders up, I now realized I had only seen a two-dimensional mirror image staring at me from a piece of glass, and occasionally a snapshot, equally two-dimensional. That's all. The roundness, the living, space-filling presence of myself I did not know at all. And that, I now discovered, is the way we recognize each other. Not by the shape of the nose or the color of the eyes, but the whole three-dimensional impact of all the features at once. I knew my height and weight, of course, 6'2", 187 pounds. I kept repeating, as though memorizing the description of a stranger. But what help was that when the person was lying on a bed? Here was row after row of soldiers, who all must be around that size. They were all of them, like me, in their late teens or early 20s. All of them in hospital pajamas, under brown army blankets, and every one of them with a GI haircut. The only thing I had to go by was that the form I was looking for had to be in one of the 3 small single rooms at the front of each ward. But in these rooms I had already seen a dozen men who looked exactly the way I imagined myself. And I barely began to search this lady wrench of a place. How would I know when I found myself? Could I have passed myself already without knowing it? On and on I wandered, pausing, studying faces, turning away. The loneliness I felt in the unfamiliar city was now a mounting panic. I was cut off from everyone in the world, from the solidness of the physical earth itself, and now even from my own identity. If the person on the bed was heavyset, or if he had blonde hair or freckles, I hurried on. But in the dim glow of the nightlight, it wasn't easy. To even see that much. It was hopeless. I leaned against a wall. I had grown used to the fact that walls and furniture didn't hold me up, but the position was a habit. And I cudgeled my memory for some mark, some physical characteristic that would identify me alone among all these sleeping 20-year-old soldiers. Some mark on my hands or face? A wart, maybe, or a scar. The Pi Gamma Delta ring. Of course, the Black Onyx oval with the golden owl. Why hadn't I thought of it before? I would have to start all over now. Have to go back to every room where the guy in the bed looked like I believe I looked. I started back the way I came. That is, I guessed this is the way. It was all so confusing. Identical wards, opening off identical corridors, in and out of the small single rooms I sped, sparing only a glance if the left hand was outside the covers. More often than not, however, it was hidden beneath the sheets, and then I could only wait for the sleeper to change position. Once I sat for a long time beside a dark-haired man whose mouth and chin, in that faint light, reminded me of my father's. He was moaning slightly, sleeping on his left side, his left arm under the pillow. And the more I stared at him, the more I was sure this was my own physical self. Again and again I grabbed at that pillow, trying to jerk it away, but my fingers only closed on air. At last he heaved himself up on one elbow, groping for the water picture on the night table. On his left hand was a golden wedding band. So from ward to ward I continued my search. A number of the soldiers I passed were awake, staring silently at the ceiling, or sitting at the side of the bed smoking a cigarette. And it was these waking people who made my aloneness so terrible. It's one thing to step unnoticed into a room where someone is sleeping. Another altogether to have him look right at you and give no sign that you exist. In the hallways, I persisted in jumping aside when a nurse or an orderly approached. I knew now that we would not collide, that not even touch each other. But somehow the thought of someone walking through the very space I was standing was more than I could cope with. At last, in my roaming, I came to the X-ray department. The white coat technician I had met earlier was sitting at a desk reading some papers in a clipboard. Here was the last human being who had spoken to me. "Look at me," I shouted at him. "I'm standing right here." He uncapped his pen, jotted something on the paper. Was it only a few hours ago that I'd been carried into this room on a stretcher? Surely that was weeks ago. Years ago? Or maybe it was only minutes. Something was strange about time, too, in this world, where rules about space, speed, and solid mass were all suspended. I had lost all sense of whether an experience was taking a split second or whether it was lasting for hours. I felt reluctant to leave the only person I had recognized, but eventually, after how long I couldn't tell, I wandered on. Most corridors, most wards, 12 beds along the right wall, 12 along the left, 3 offices at the end near the door. These rooms were across from them. Sleeping men, wide-awake men, bored men, frightened men, but never the ring with the owl. In one little cubicle, a young man was crying. Homesick, maybe. A lot of us cried when we thought no one was watching us, especially now around Christmas time. In the next cubicle, no one. The bed stripped of sheets. In the last one, I drew back, startled. There was someone on the bed, all right, but the sheets had been pulled all the way up over the head, leaving only his arms outside the blankets. Strangely rigid and straight, those arms looked unnatural, hands turned palms downward. On the third finger of the left hand was a small gold owl and an oval of a black onyx.